Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk, Warehouse Management Mobile App in Microsoft Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management. My name is Evan, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation, and by participating in the session using Microsoft Teams, your name, email address, phone number, and/or title may be viewable by other session participants. If you do not consent to being a part of a recorded session, please disconnect at this time. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout the event. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Now let's get started. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Zach Greenvoss, Principal Program Manager. Zach, over to you.
Thanks, Evan. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tech Talk. As Evan said, we will be covering the new warehouse management mobile app for Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management. My name is Zach Greenvoss, and I'm a solution architect on the Microsoft Fast Track team. So now this is a refresh of a Tech Talk we did back in 2017 when we covered the introduction of the new warehouse app at the time. We won't be spending too much time covering the current in-market app in this talk, as we'll be focusing on the new app and the roadmap moving forward. So I do want to point out up front that this talk will be focused exclusively on the warehousing app itself and not the broader functionality of the advanced warehousing module. We've had some great tech talks recently that covered the warehouse functionality, as well as advanced configurations and best practices. You can find these talks at the following link. And yes, these slides will be made available after the talk. So during this tech talk, we will show some of the history of the various advanced warehousing interfaces and how we got to this point today. We'll discuss the way the app connects to Dynamics, both in the cloud and edge scenarios. I want to show the various UI elements, as well as show a few workflows in the new app itself. And then finally, we will end with a fairly detailed explanation of how to get the app connected to your environment. And if we have some time, we'll do Q&A. So let's get started. So the advanced warehousing module in Dynamics 365 was introduced in the AX 2012 R3 release. At the time, we had the warehousing module devices portal. So this was a pure HTML solution targeting low capability devices. This also required an intermediate server that connected to Dynamics and generated the custom HTML screens. In 2017, we introduced the native app that is in market today. Like the one we will talk about today, this app runs on Android and Windows 10 devices and removed the requirement to have an intermediate server. Connections go straight from the device to the cloud-hosted environment. That brings us to today. With 4 years of feedback on the platform and growth in the app, we have decided it makes sense to release a new warehousing app that can help us provide the flexibility and accessibility needed for the next generation of warehouse workflows. We are excited about the foundation we have established in the new app and think you will see the benefits immediately over the older solutions. So the app is currently available on both the Google Play Store as well as the Windows Store. You can see the links below to download the app for your specific OS. So we're going to cover this in more detail later, but I know it's likely top of mind for many of you. The new app will be released as a separate app on the various app stores, so you can migrate to it when it makes sense for your organization. So over time, the current in-market app will be depreciated and removed, but this will be at least 1 year from the depreciation notice as per the standard Microsoft policy. So in terms of Dynamics, the app does require a feature to be enabled in the target system to unlock the full functionality. This feature is hidden in 10.0.15 and 10.0.16 and would require a special flight to unlock. We sometimes refer to this as a private preview. It's how we test features with customers. If you're on one of these versions and would like to test the app out, please join the Warehouse Yammer group, and we can work with you to enable the flight in your environment. For 10.017 and higher, and 10.017 is the April 2021 release. On this version and higher, this feature will be marked as generally available, and you can find the necessary feature in the feature management workspace. So I have a picture of it down below. The full name is Enhanced Icon Management and User Settings for the new Warehouse app. So once this is enabled, the new app will be fully operational. Okay, so let's talk briefly about how the new warehousing app connects to Dynamics environments. It's actually very simple, as there's no intermediate server in play here. So the app connects directly to the cloud environment, and the core workflows are managed in X++ on the application object servers, which is the same model as the previous application. Almost no business logic is executed locally on the device. Primarily, the front-end app handles the UI and data entry components, and XML containing the responses is sent back and forth from the app and the Dynamics environment. This also means that customizations and new workflows are encoded as X++ extensions within Dynamics 365 and are not done using mobile app development techniques. Now again, this is unchanged from the guidance and the sample code we have provided in the past. All the various extension abilities that worked for the previous version of the Warehouse app will work for the new one as well. One major change that is coming in Dynamics 365 for supply chain management is the ability to run warehousing workloads on an edge device deployed separately from the main hub environment. This edge device can be running in a distributed data center closer to your warehousing facilities, or it could be running on a local Azure Stack instance. Either way, the app will utilize the same connection model to communicate with the edge environment. It will send XML data back and forth, and the user will primarily interact with that UI front end. Now, this talk will not cover the changes coming in the cloud and edge workloads. We will detail more of this in an upcoming Tech Talk. So let's take some time to dive into the various UI elements in the new app and how users will interact with the warehousing system. So one thing we are really proud of in the new app, and one of the reasons we believe it has been worthwhile to establish a new app baseline, is the ability for the app to correctly scale the user interface across various screen sizes and device types. So this same app can be used in a tablet mode for a forklift driver, and the same screen can scale down to an arm-mounted scanner for a forward picker, for example. Now this screen shows the same screen in the app scaled across 3 sizes. I will note that there's a little bit of fine tuning to this display before the final release in April. So one common feedback we have received from users is the inability to customize the UI look and feel. With the new app, we have added the ability for users to specify an overall UI theme. So we currently have a light and dark mode, as well as 2 high contrast modes to assist with visibility. So here I have the light and dark modes, and here are the high contrast modes. And note that these are part of the specific user configuration options and can be customized for each user account. So another improvement we see in the new app is the addition of icons throughout the user interface, which can make it easier for users to visually understand the different menu items as well as the various steps within the process. So feedback from users has been that the current app relies exclusively on words to describe the menu items and the various steps. And for some warehouse operators, having a more visual interface guide can be beneficial and more accessible. So currently these icons are fixed. We do have a roadmap item to allow for the customization of these. And we do have a host of new setting options in the new app. One of the key drivers for this new app was to support the accessibility standards so we can reach as many people as possible. So the scaling factors for both text and buttons allows a user to ensure they have a user interface that works for them. We've also added the ability to customize both the sound and vibration level of the app. If you've used the previous app, you know that that can be very loud when you get those error messages. So it's nice to be able to tone that down sometimes. In addition, we have the ability to customize what we call the best button position. So as I said before, this app is intended to operate across a range of devices and interaction models. We want the default OK action of the app to be located in the easiest place to select. But this might change depending on user handedness and device usage. So we now have the ability for a user to specify where the default OK button should be located. So I'll show this in detail on the next slide. So finally, a big change with the new app is the fact that all of these settings are pushed into Dynamics and saved against that user ID. So this allows a user to set up their necessary settings and see them reused no matter which physical device is selected. So often warehouses will have a pool of scanning devices that an operator can select from, and storing the configuration settings locally on the device would mean re-entry of the settings every time. So now these settings are synced back to Dynamics and can even be updated by a system administrator if a global change needs to be pushed. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to maximize the efficiency of all of our warehouse operators. One way we can facilitate this is to ensure the operator can interact with the application in the most efficient way possible. So you can see our new UI slider here. I'll show it in action in a bit, but the key to understand is that the check mark is ideally where the operator can most efficiently swipe towards. So for a right-handed person holding a phone-sized device, this is often the bottom right of the screen. This is the default, but these factors are not universal, and different people and different devices could be more efficient with these other layouts. So the settings are flexible and allow the user to change where this default action area is located. And again, this is a user-specific setting. So here is the default UI on a phone-sized device. I just want to walk through some of the major UI elements of the interface. So the primary data input zone has been pushed up to the top of the screen, and this is the default data entry area. And the device has an embedded scanner or an attached barcode reader. This is where the data will land when anything is scanned. We also support data entry by a keyboard. Note that if the data entry is not text, like a number or an enum, then a different UI will display, allowing the user to select the number or the enum element. So you can click into that data entry zone to pull up a dedicated data entry screen. So this is something you'll see often see in the Windows 10 interface. For example, when I demo it in a minute here, like the interaction from my laptop, I'll do this so that I can copy and paste into the UI. But it's not typically something you would see on an actual barcode scanner very much, since you can just scan or enter the data directly from that main UI screen. If a numeric field, such as a quantity, is active, then a spinner data entry screen is displayed, which allows the user to swipe through to the correct number entry. Note that the efficiency of this interaction is reduced if the number gets too high. So we just skip this control if the number is greater than 20. And in that case, we also support the direct entry of the number. Again, just by clicking on the data entry zone, we'll pull up a secondary screen, which will allow the user to type the number in. And this can be used regardless of that spinner displaying or not. The top right section of the app will always display the previously entered data from the user. This can be useful to know what license plate or work order was just selected, for example. This main section of the app is where all of the summary data for the work item is displayed. In the previous warehouse app, we only showed a subset of data, and we had a separate tab for the complete set of displayable data. We don't have this tab interface anymore, and instead just list all the fields in this center section. However, since obviously there's not enough screen real estate to show everything, we control the ordering through the concept of priority groups, which are configured in Dynamics 365. So this is the same process used in the current in-market app to control what gets displayed in that summary section. So clicking or tapping on that summary section will open up a new screen showing all of the relevant data for the operation and indicate which data elements will need to be scanned or entered by the operator. So as I was showing earlier, the best button location, the best button location will contain the default submit or OK button, which will submit the current screen back to the server for processing. This is also what will be invoked if the user enters data and terminates that with a carriage return or scans a barcode into the data entry area of the UI. So the slider control I'm showing here is used when the UI is sized to a standard phone-sized shape. So as I was saying earlier, this slider is designed to allow the operator to quickly indicate the current step is complete while ensuring the OK button is not inadvertently submitted in a high interaction environment. So the user will typically simply have to swipe on the bottom of the device, which will virtually grab that blue ball in the center and move it to the check mark, indicating the action is selected. If the UI has been resized to a larger or like a tablet interface, then this slider control is removed and we will just show the checkbox directly as an interaction button. The opposite side of that OK button is where the remaining interactions are located. This can be a variable list depending on the current state of the work item and the configurations enabled for this menu item and user. Again, in this phone-based UI, the slider control would allow the user to swipe opposite the OK button and pull up the list of possible actions. Like this type of menu that might pop up when this is selected. The cancel option will likely always be there, but those other options are going to be context sensitive. Okay. And again, if this is displayed in a tablet view, then you'll have the list of actions available on the bottom of the UI, or again, on the top, if you've indicated the best position is at the top. Okay, so let's take a second and pull up the app, and we're going to walk through some of the warehouse workflows directly in the new app. All right, so you can see the new app here. I have it sized kind of generally as a phone-based size. If you're used to the mobile or the warehousing module, and we'll talk a little bit about this briefly in a little bit here, but we still use the same concept of menus and menu items. And so I've logged in with a kind of a default demo data environment. So we have this kind of standard USMF menu structure, right? So we have the inbound and outbound. So if we were going to go in here and do a sales picking, just to show it real quick here. So I'm in the sales picking interface. As I was saying, I can just start typing, or if I was scanning something with a barcode, it's going right into that data entry screen. But maybe I feel like, you know, this UI right now is a little too small for me. So I'm actually going to come out and go into this settings, right? So we were talking about this settings screen before. And I think that what I'd like to do is bump this up so it's a little bit easier for me and for everyone to be able to see. So we'll bump that text up. We can bump our buttons up, which will increase this. So now we've increased both the text and the button, right? So it's a little easier for us all to see what's happening. Okay? So if we come back in, maybe we, as I was saying before, I'll click in there, and then you can see me paste, right? But you can also, as I was showing before, you can also just enter directly into that data entry screen. Okay, so again, we have it sized as kind of a standard kind of phone size. So we have this slider UI. So I have location confirmation enabled here. So I either could just hit the enter button, I could, have scanned a location, or I can grab this in the middle and I can swipe it over to this OK, right? Which will now submit it back to the server. Okay. And then if now we're expected, we're going through kind of a standard sales order picking process here. If we take a look at what, this same screen would look like on a larger interface, so this would be more of a tablet based, right? We still have the same basic elements of the UI as I was showing before, but they've been obviously scaled up, a bit more real estate, and you can see all the buttons have been sort of removed from that, from the three dots and shown across the bottom there. And if we scale it all the way down to a much more small, like arm mounted device, you can see we have the buttons here on the side, and so we can still activate obviously the default kind of submit button here. We can still enter the data, right? So if I want to scan the license plate, which for this first line is 24, and then I can hit OK, and it's gonna think about resizing that. And then it's going to give me that next step. Okay? And if I need to scroll over to the side on this small device, that's what these little arrows are telling me, that I have sort of buttons or information over to the side. I can either swipe or I can use the scroll button to do that on a computer. So let's sort of scale this back out. And so what you can see is on this sales order picking workflow, I have enabled quantity confirmation because I wanted to show you this spinner control. So now we're expecting the worker to enter this 10 or basically confirm the quantity that they're picking. So there's a couple different ways to interact with this spinner control. This is a touch-based device, so I can just kind of quickly swipe through by touching it and spinning to the correct number. If that is sort of not the interaction model I want, I can also tap at the top or the bottom of the spinner control to kind of increment it by 1. And then also, if all of that sort of isn't the way that I want to interact, I can also tap at the top into that data entry area, and I can just, either using the mouse or my finger, I can enter in the number that I want. And when I click this check mark, it's actually going to go ahead and submit that. Okay. All right. So then we're expected to target. I think I wanted that. So, and I'll just hit the enter key to submit this, right? So it's going to submit that target. And now we've done the first pick, and it's telling us to go and pick the second item. And one of the things I want to point out is you can kind of see, like I was talking about before, you have this center area with the summary data, but we can see that we don't have all the information, right? Maybe we need to see more of it. So we can always tap or click into this center area to pull up that secondary screen, and so we can see that was the target LP, right? I couldn't see that on that first screen. So you can always tap, and then there's a back button, so you can always sort of get out of that if you need to. Okay? So we can sort of walk through this second pick real quickly here. I think I have a longer license plate. We'll go ahead and enter 10 for the quantity. Okay, and so we've done the 2 picks for this sales order picking. It's now telling us, okay, we need to do a put operation at the bay door. We'll say okay. And then if you look up here at the top, we'll see that we get that work completed. There has been some feedback that needs to either stay longer or persist, and so I know the team is working on that. But that's it. That was a kind of a standard sales order picking, outbound picking flow with 2 lines in the new app. Okay, so one of the questions that we got, or one of the kind of thoughts that we had, was we also wanted to show a sales order. So this sales order has a quantity that's much larger. Actually, you can see it here. It has a 30-piece pick, so it's going to be above. We still have quantity confirmation turned on because it's the same flow, but now you're going to see what would happen in the app if when we get to that quantity confirmation, the number is greater than 20, right? So we're not going to show the spinner. We're actually just going to drop right into that data entry screen, right? So you'll see that here. So first I'm going to confirm the location, okay? And then I'm going to scan a license plate, which is 24. And now it's going to say, okay, since we're not going to show that spinner control, what we're going to do is we're going to drop right into sort of the most efficient way to enter that data, which is this screen, right? And we are given an indication that the quantity that we expect them to pick will be 30. And so they can either type it in with the keyboard, or they can, tap it in on the screen and say, okay, I picked 30 here. Okay. And then obviously we can sort of just finish that out. And then we can do the put. And I can just show you here, we also have those other actions that are available here. So we could cancel out of the whole workflow. We could do an override location. We're going to put it somewhere else. We can also click somewhere else, not in that menu, to sort of make that menu go away to pick none of those options, which is what I just did. And we'll just go ahead and submit that. Okay. All right, so that was, as I was saying, that was kind of a standard outbound workflow. Let's just show a real quick inbound workflow. So we'll go ahead and back out of here. We'll come in and we'll do a simple purchase receiving. Okay, so we come in here, I have a purchase order. So this purchase order has 2 lines on it. So it has, so again, I can, standing at the bay door, at the dock, I'm going to scan this first item. And then again, we pull up this quantity. We're going to say we've received 10, or we see that there's 10 inbound. If I wanted to, again, I could click on this center area and see more information. I'll go ahead and say, okay, yep, 10 looks good to us. Okay, I can confirm that. And then we know that we're also receiving a second item on this purchase order, also 10. Okay, we could also click in here and enter 10. Okay, confirm this. Yep, looks good. Slide this over. Okay, so we've now received both of those. Let me just refresh my work up here real quick. And now if we wanted to execute that put away work, we would cancel out of this flow and we'd execute that put away work menu item. So the work that was just created was one. Right, so this is we're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna pick up this first item. We have 10 pieces. Okay, I pick it up from the receiving bay. That's great. That second work created just one higher. So this is, everyone knows that the demo data, right, the standard kind of purchase put away is user groups. That's what I'm doing here. I'm actually just grouping this. I'm sort of picking up both of these for the put away work. And then so once I've done that, I can actually slide over here and say that I've sort of filled up my forklift, or I've filled up the thing that I'm going to now be doing the put away work on. So we're good there. And then it's going to say, okay, go take that first item, A002, to this location. Okay, I'll go drop that off there. And then go drop this second item, or the other item, at this location with this target license plate. Okay. And again, we have that work completed. Okay. So we've done kind of a standard kind of outbound sales order flow, a standard purchase order inbound flow. Okay, just one or two quick things to show. Let's see. We also, just as in the previous app, for a few years now, we've had this concept of a work list. So we still support this work list. And actually, I think it looks much better in the new app because we have these kind of header details as well for each of the data elements, which we actually didn't show in the older apps. So you can see, like, and this is a variable list that's controlled with a query that you can specify when you set this work list up. So you can kind of define what these things are that are most important to you to show for your workers. And then just like the other work lists, you can do filtering on here, and you can do sorting, and on any of them you can click on one of these, right? So if the worker is here and they see the work they want to execute, they can click on that, and it will launch them directly into that work item, right, to start executing. Cancel out of here. And this obviously, all of these interfaces scale up, so if I'm looking at this work list on a tablet device, obviously we have a little bit more screen real estate. We can zoom in a little bit there. Okay. This same kind of card-based model also works for the various kind of lookup screens. So if we go back and look at this like an item inquiries, it'll actually operate very similar to that. So if we come in here and we say, give me all the sort of information about this item. Probably typed it wrong here. So if we get an item in there, you type it in correctly, then you'll get that same card-based interface with all the sort of the quantity information across the warehouse for that specific item. Okay. So then the last thing I wanted to show was just to show you in Dynamics, right? So we have in Dynamics, we have under the warehousing. So I'm in the warehousing management menu. And we have under the mobile device, we now have, let me make this a little easier to see here. Yeah, under setup, under mobile device, we now have these two new sort of menu items, the mobile device brands and mobile device user settings. The brands is where we're capturing information from the mobile devices that are in use in your organization. So it's really just sort of some data capture that can be interesting. But the mobile device user settings, this is where we are syncing that data back from the device. So I have it actually pulled up here. You can see this is the laptop that I'm working on right now, and this is the user ID. And so this is my settings. And if we refresh this, we can actually see that when I scaled that up, this is now at 120. So if we come back in here, and I just want to show it actually changing here. If we maybe bring this back down to like 70 and the button down, just so it's more obvious, right? So then backing out of that settings, we'll sync it back to the server. And if we refresh this screen, we can now see that has been sort of synced back, right? So Dynamics now has that. And if we take a look, and this is where all of those different users, right? So the different users that would log in, different devices that they're logging in on, those are each persisted back into Dynamics. Okay. Great. Okay, so now I will walk through the steps required to get the app communicating with Dynamics 365 for supply chain management. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a feature that is required to be enabled in the Dynamics environment to be able to fully utilize the app. So since the app uses the same connection as the current in-market app, it is possible to connect the app without having first enabled the feature. The basic functionality will work, but there'll be no icons in the app and the user settings won't be saved correctly. So we've actually seen a few people hit bugs in the app, and upon investigation, we discovered they have not actually enabled that feature. So just make sure that you enable that feature that we showed earlier. The new app will execute on Android version 4.4 and higher. Ideally, any device that runs this should be supported, but obviously we recommend testing the app extensively on the target device. So in terms of Windows support, we are a universal Windows app. So any device that runs a recent version of Windows 10 will run the app. We aim to support any device that runs Android 4.4 or higher, but we don't have a certification program or a defined set of hardware that we recommend. So these are the hardware devices that we have typically seen our customers using with the existing mobile app. And we certainly will ensure that these are covered through our testing or customer testing in the preview program. Now, internally, We're testing the app on those the following devices at the bottom there, and have ensured capability across all of them. So I'm going to walk through the details that are needed to go from a blank system to a working app. So this is fairly involved, but I do want to make sure we cover each of these steps. In general, most of these would be done by the implementation partner or system administrator. A warehouse operator will not need to deal with any of this complexity. Like all integrations in the Dynamics and Azure cloud world, the first thing that will need to be defined is an Azure application. So this is created within your Azure Active Directory in the Azure portal. Select the app registrations node under your tenant Azure Active Directory. Don't need much configuration specified in this application registration. We used to need to specify various API access settings, but this is no longer required. We also do not support multi-tenant access for the warehouse app, so you can just leave the default settings on this page. Just provide a meaningful name for the app registration. So once this is created, you'll need to make note of the application ID. This is the GUID indicated at the top. This is often referred to as a client ID, and this is synonymous with an application ID. So the Azure Application ID provides the overarching container for communicating with Dynamics from external systems. The specific mechanism for authenticating into Dynamics with the application ID is controlled by a certificate or a client secret. So certificates are the recommended way for performing authentication, but currently both are supported. Certificates can be provided by a certificate authority, or they can be self-signed. Either way, the public portion of the cert is uploaded into this portal, and the full public-private key pair is placed on the client device and used to authenticate. So if you have Intune or another device management system, you can use the distribution mechanisms to push out a common certificate that is used across your fleet without having to manually configure each device. So the client secret method is more like a username password authentication model. You'll generate a unique key value, which will then be used when communicating to the Azure authentication system. Since there is no way to properly hide this value, it is not supported for device management scenarios like Intune. You would need to manually input the client secret. You'll see that shortly. So before you can connect the app into Dynamics, there needs to be a user account specified that will perform the actual operations on the server side. It is recommended that this user have the warehouse mobile device user security role. So this next step is not unique to the warehouse application. In fact, any external system communicating with Dynamics and utilizing the Azure Application ID model will need to have a record in this table to correctly associate a user account in Dynamics with the incoming service calls. So you'll need to enter the application ID, which is referred to as a client ID in this screen, that we saw earlier, and associate it with the specific user account that we just created for executing warehouse operations. Now, strictly speaking, to be absolutely safe and provide clear separation between users, you should create an application ID for each user account and associate them here. In this way, you can revoke access to a specific client ID from Dynamics in the event that a device was stolen or a certificate was compromised. However, most customers do not create a separate application ID for every warehouse operator. There is a more lightweight worker concept that will record the specific operator actions executed at each step in the warehouse. So there are a few minor steps that need to be done in Dynamics before the app is really up and running. This is also true of the current in-market app. So if you're used to the current steps required, these will be familiar. So we have the concept of app field names, which control how the app will present data input fields for the given field types. So for example, it will indicate when a control type should be a numeric input or a text input. And if you have the camera scanning enabled, then it will know when to launch the camera for barcode scanning. Perhaps even more critical is the app field priority setting. So this controls the order of fields in the central panel of the app. As we saw, it can be important to prioritize fields for the warehouse operators on devices where the screen does not allow all the fields to be displayed. In the Dynamics 365 UI, you'll be able to order the fields. The priority groups themselves are not used in the new app. This was used primarily in the current in-market app to decide which labels to display in the summary section. So now you can simply treat this list as a single priority list of fields. And if the current work step does not contain any data for the field, it will be skipped. So you can see the current settings have the location field below the visible area. You can kind of see it peeking here at the bottom. The user, as I showed in the demo, would have to tap or touch that center panel to be able to pull up and see the location information. And you can see in the field list, location is way down here, right below kind of all these other items. So if we decide this isn't the interface we want to present to our operators, we can actually bump this location all the way to the top here. And now in this screen, same data, same work item. You can see this location is now pulled up to right below the pick, sort of the pick operation. I'll go back. Locations way down here in the priority list. You can't see the location. Again, same basic menu item, same work item. We put the location all the way at the top, and you can see that this location is now moved up in that list of fields. Okay, so that's how you can control what gets shown sort of at the top of that list, what's most important for those users. Okay. We do have the ability to provide a default set of data for the app fields and priority list. You can find the pages in the warehouse menu under Setup Mobile Device. On each page, there is a Create Default Setup button, which will provide that starting data, or it will reset it to the default configuration. So under a specific user account, a set of lightweight worker users are configured, which provide access to a specific set of warehouses. So this also defines the menus that are available for the user and a set of worker-related configuration options, such as allowing overrides on the pick and put operations, and if their counts need to be reviewed by a supervisor during a cycle count operation. So in the demo data configuration, we ship with each worker account having just access to a single warehouse, but it is possible to assign a worker to a set of warehouses. And note that the language setting for the mobile device is controlled by this top-level HR user. If you need to have users that operate with different language settings, they need to be represented by separate work user accounts with the appropriate language setting configured in Dynamics 365. Before anything can show up in the mobile device for an operator to use, the implementation team must make some critical business decisions and design the actual warehouse workflows within Dynamics. So as I said at the beginning of the talk, we have several tech talks that cover the configuration of the advanced warehousing module. Ultimately, this all comes together with the definition of a menu item, and this is what the operator selects when they want to conduct a warehouse operation, such as sales picking or PO receiving that we saw earlier. So I won't be covering the many options you have here. Again, please see our earlier tech talks. Okay, so now it comes time to actually connect that new warehousing app to an environment. You have three major options here. You can add the connection information from a file. This would typically be done if you were distributing the connections via Intune or other device management system. You can also scan all the relevant information that is encoded into a QR code. This allows you to have a single image that can be quickly scanned by each device and import the necessary settings. And finally, you can always enter the connection information manually. This is fine for development or small deployments, but it can be onerous for larger warehouses, which was why we have added those previous two options. If you're entering connection information via a file or a QR code, the format of the data is actually identical. We have a standard JSON format that you can see here, and it's documented in the doc site. If you are distributing the connections file, then you would push out this file to a standard location on the device with the connections.json name, and the app will be able to discover it. In the QR code scenario, you would create this text file and then encode it into the QR code with some sort of QR library, several of which are available online. Note that both scenarios require you to use the certificate authentication method, since otherwise you would be having to leave the secret key from the Azure application in plain text, and this is not allowed from a security perspective. So in both cases, you would need to ensure that that full public-private key cert is deployed to the device. Again, most people would use some sort of device management tool like Intune to do this. But if you're going to enter the connection information manually, let's walk through the different values, and it will help you understand the required data in that file or QR code scenario as well. So when entering a connection manually, you have the option to choose the authentication method. You can choose client secret or certificate. Again, the client secret method is based on the Azure application client secret key value that we created earlier in the Azure portal. As I said before, this is much like a password and is not supported in the file or QR code configuration method. You can also set up a certificate authentication method in the manual scenario. You will need to have, as I was saying, you need to upload the public key into the Azure portal and get the full public-private key to the device, and note down the certificate thumbprint in the connection settings. And now note that in Windows, this needs to live in the user certificate store, and on Android, the user will need to select the actual certificate upon first use. Since we now support having multiple connections within the app, you will be expected to provide some sort of meaningful name for the connection configuration. Typically, this would help you identify if it is pointed at prod or UAT and the specific company this connection is based on. You will need to provide the Azure application ID, which is again referred to as a client ID here. This is the GUID that was generated when we created the Azure application registration, and is the same value we entered into the Dynamics Azure application page and associated with a user account. As you saw earlier, this is where you'd enter either the client secret or the certificate thumbprint. This is the base URL of the environment that you want to connect to with the app. This should be just that base URL with no slash at the end, or it can sometimes cause some authentication issues. Azure Active Directory tenant tells us where to send the authentication request to. It needs to be in this specific format with login windows.net, followed by your specific tenant URI. This is typically the same as your domain name for the user. So for example, I have Microsoft.com for environments deployed under our tenant. And then finally, you do need to specify the specific legal entity that this connection is operating under. I know a common request is to allow a connection to span legal entities. The team is aware of this request and is investigating what it might look like. But for now, each connection you define must be defined within the context of a legal entity or company. Okay, so that was a pretty detailed look at the various configuration steps required to get the app up and running against a Dynamics environment. We looked at the necessary step in the Azure portal and how we can create an application registration with an associated client secret or an uploaded certificate. We looked at the necessary steps in Dynamics, which include registering the new Azure application and associating the connection with a user account and creating the necessary data within the warehouse module, including app field and priority data, as well as menu items and workers. Finally, we looked at the different options available to connect the app itself to an environment and walked through the necessary configuration data. I strongly encourage everyone to join the mobile app Yammer group. We have the product team engaged here for any issues or bugs that are found in the preview program, and you can see videos and demos of the app in action. We have another Yammer group that is more broadly focused on the advanced warehousing module in general. It's also a good place to ask questions and learn about the functionality. Hope that was useful to you to see the new warehousing app in action and understand the various configuration and connection options you have. If we have time, I'll check in with Marcus and see if we have any questions that are outstanding. Are you there, Marcus?
Yes, there's a few questions around GS1 128 passing support. And then that is top voted on Ideas Portal and something we have high on our backlog, but it's not supported with the first release of this app. And then also I want to mention that while we support Android 4.4, it might not be recommended to buy new devices with such an old Android version. You should always try to get a device or buy devices that runs the latest version of Android and are security compliant and receive security updates. So that would be the recommendation from our side.
That makes sense. Okay. Great, thanks, Marcus. All right, so then thank you everyone for attending this talk. As I said, I hope it was useful, and have a great day. Evan, I'll pass it back to you.
Awesome, thank you, Zach. We would like to get your feedback on today's session. I've posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. We value your feedback and welcome your input on how we did today and what you would like to see in future sessions. That survey scores on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible, and we thank you for your participation in that. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters and a thank you to our audience for logging in and joining us today. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.